There was no warning. 1 second you were fine, the next, something dropped through the floor of your chest before you even understood why. A look, a clipped reply, a pause on the other end of the phone that lasted half a second too long. And just like that, you weren't in the room anymore. You were somewhere else, somewhere younger, somewhere smaller, responding to something that, if a stranger described it to you, wouldn't sound like much of anything at all. This is the part that makes people feel crazy, because you've read the books, you've listened to the right podcasts, maybe you've sat across from a therapist and nodded along as they explained exactly why you do this. You know, intellectually, that the comment wasn't really about you. You know you're supposed to pause before you respond. You know all of it, and still, here you are again. That's not a failure of discipline. It's not proof that the work you've done doesn't count. It's something much more specific than that. A signal. An old, honest signal. Coming from a part of you that the work hasn't reached yet. This video is about that part. Not the version of you that reads and reflects and genuinely wants to grow, but the version underneath it. The one that still flinches, still snaps back, still goes quiet and cold when it gets scared. Because until you understand that version, you'll keep running into it at the worst possible moments, in the most important relationships you have. If you've ever sat with the question, why do I keep doing this? Type it below when we get there. You're further along than you think. Let's get into it.
Let's not start at the moment you got triggered. Let's start earlier, somewhere your mind never goes when you're actually in the middle of it. Here's the mechanics of what's really happening. When you get triggered, your nervous system isn't reacting to what's in front of you. It's reacting to a memory of danger, one stored so deep in the body that it skips your rational mind entirely. By the time your prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain that thinks, weighs, considers, gets a vote, your jaw is already tight, your tone has already shifted, and you're already 2 sentences into a fight you didn't decide to start. Researchers sometimes call this an amygdala hijack. Your brain's alarm system is old, fast, and not picky. It evolved to keep a body alive in a world of teeth and claws, not to interpret a Slack message or a sigh across the dinner table. It fires whether the threat is a predator or a tone of voice, because speed mattered more than accuracy when this system was built. And right now, standing in your kitchen, nothing is actually hunting you, but your body has decided otherwise. Why? Because at some point, in some form, it felt like something was. Most explanations stop right there. Your amygdala fired, here's a breathing technique, end of video. That's useful, as far as it goes, but it skips the more interesting question. Why this thing? Why does your coworker shrug off the exact comment that sends you spinning for 3 days? Why can you stay perfectly calm during one disagreement and completely lose your footing during another that looks from the outside much smaller? The answer isn't sitting in your brain chemistry, it's sitting in your history. Every outsized reaction has a backstory. Every time you've thought, why am I this upset over something so small? That confusion is pointing at something unfinished. Not something defective in you, but something that happened to you, around you, or to you repeatedly, back when you didn't have the tools to fully process it. Think about the things that tend to set people off. Being ignored, being criticized in front of others, a raised voice out of nowhere, a partner going silent mid-conflict, being told you're too sensitive, a message left on read for hours, credit for your work going to someone else. None of these are catastrophes on their own, but if you grew up somewhere where being ignored meant something was seriously wrong, where criticism always came wrapped in shame, where raised voices were the warning track before something worse, where silence was a punishment handed out on purpose, then these moments don't register as mildly uncomfortable. They register as emergencies, because your nervous system learned, at a foundational level, that these exact signals required an immediate, all-hands response. And here's the part that trips people up.
That learning doesn't expire just because you got older. It doesn't dissolve because you moved out, went no contact, found a kind partner, or started therapy. Your nervous system doesn't operate on the same calendar as your conscious mind. You can know, with total clarity, that your manager isn't your father, and your partner isn't your mother, and this disagreement isn't that one, and your body can still feel exactly like it is. That gap between what you know and what you feel is where the trigger actually lives. And closing it has very little to do with learning more facts. It has everything to do with finally listening to what the feeling has been trying to tell you all along. Carl Jung put it simply: what you don't make conscious will keep steering your life, and you'll mistake it for fate. It's a tidy sentence until you actually sit with it, and then it gets uncomfortable, because it describes something nearly everyone does, every single day. Here's a misconception worth clearing up first. People assume this conversation only applies if you survived something obviously dramatic: abuse, major loss, violence. Those experiences absolutely leave deep marks. No argument there. But wounds don't require a catastrophe to take root. They form anywhere a need went consistently unmet. Anywhere a kid learned that showing certain emotions got them punished, or ignored, or laughed at. Anywhere love seemed to depend on performance. Anywhere "I'm scared" got answered with "You're fine, stop it," instead of comfort. Anywhere confusion was met with irritation instead of an answer. None of that has to be a single dramatic event. Often it's just a pattern, something repeated quietly over years that taught a developing mind how the world works, how people respond to you, how safe it actually is to be yourself out loud. And because you absorbed all of that before you had the language to question any of it, it became something like the operating system running underneath everything you think, feel, and do today. Psychologists have names for the conclusions that get baked in this way. Beliefs like, "I'm not enough," "people eventually leave," "if I let my guard down, I'll get hurt," "I have to earn love by performing," "anger means I'm in danger," "conflict means this relationship is ending." You didn't choose any of these. You built them because they were the most reasonable conclusions a young, developing mind could draw from the evidence in front of it at the time. They weren't irrational, they were adaptive. They kept you safe, or as safe as you could manage, in conditions that felt unstable or threatening. But you don't live there anymore. The belief, unfortunately, hasn't gotten the memo. So when something in your present life rhymes, even faintly, with that original wound, the old system switches on. Not because you're weak, not because the growth you've done isn't real, but because the wound is still sitting there, fully charged, waiting for someone to finally turn toward it the right way. This is close to what trauma researcher Bessel van der Kolk means when he describes the body as keeping its own record, separate from the mind's. You can narrate your childhood with total clarity. You can understand your parents' limitations with real compassion. You can trace every one of your patterns back to its root with impressive precision, and your nervous system can still respond to the right trigger exactly the way it did when you were 9 years old. Because healing isn't only an intellectual project. It's not just about getting the story straight. It's about actually metabolizing the emotion that never got fully felt, the need that never got fully met, the grief that was never given permission to move. Here's how this tends to show up in an actual relationship. Your partner goes quiet after an argument. Nothing theatrical, they're just processing. But some part of you can't tolerate the silence. You need it resolved immediately, so you push. You ask question after question. You over-explain. You might even reignite the fight just to get a reaction out of them. Because to you, silence doesn't read as processing. It reads as abandonment, as the opening scene of something ending. Your partner isn't leaving, but a part of you, the part that learned, in a specific house, with specific people, a long time ago, exactly what withdrawal meant, doesn't know that. And until that part is acknowledged directly, it will keep steering the car, no matter how many times your adult mind tries to talk it down. The wound isn't your enemy here. It's a message. It's the part of you that never got what it needed, asking, one more time,
whether it's finally safe to receive it. Your triggers aren't derailing your growth. They are, quite literally, pointing at exactly where your growth still needs to go. The only question is whether you're willing to actually look, or whether you'll keep managing the alarm without ever reading what set it off. This next part might land a little uncomfortably, and it's worth sitting with rather than rushing past. There's a kind of inner work that genuinely transforms you, and there's another kind that, if you're honest, functions as a remarkably sophisticated way of avoiding the very thing it claims to address. From the outside, sometimes even from the inside, these two can look almost identical. The difference between them is subtle, but it changes everything. Real work reaches the level of the wound itself. It moves the emotional charge. It actually updates the nervous system, not just your vocabulary for describing it. You start to notice that things which used to flatten you now land differently, not because you suppressed the reaction or performed calm on top of it, but because something underneath genuinely shifted. The other kind is far more common and far more seductive because it feels productive the entire time. You're reading, you're journaling, you can explain your attachment style fluently, rattle off your defense mechanisms, narrate your childhood wounds with real insight. You have the vocabulary of healing completely down. But look honestly at what actually happens in the relationships that matter, in the moments that count, and the patterns are largely unchanged. You're still triggered by the same handful of things. You've just gotten remarkably skilled at analyzing it 5 minutes later. This has a name: spiritual bypassing, using the language and tools of inner work to stay one comfortable step above the actual feeling instead of moving through it. It's the person who meditates every morning and still can't sit through being criticized. The one who journals faithfully and still shuts down the second a conversation turns emotionally demanding. The one who can identify their own abandonment pattern in real time and still sends a third anxious text before getting a reply. Knowledge without integration is just a more articulate way of staying exactly where you are. And this produces a very specific kind of frustration, one you've probably felt. I've done so much work. Why am I still like this? That question is hiding an assumption worth pulling apart. It assumes the work has actually reached the wound. But has it? Or has it circled the wound, named it accurately, filed it under the right diagnosis, and left it sitting in the exact same place? Real healing asks you to be inside the feeling, not just narrating it from a safe distance. It asks you to let grief move through your body instead of explaining why you're grieving. It asks you to sit with the actual need underneath, sometimes a genuinely childlike need, instead of immediately reframing it into something more palatable. That's uncomfortable in a way that reading about it never is. That discomfort is the whole difference. There's also a quieter social pressure worth naming. In certain circles, being self-aware has become its own kind of identity, and identities get protected. So there's a pull toward presenting as someone who has it figured out, who's processed their trauma, who doesn't get rattled by small things anymore. That pressure to appear healed, rather than to actually be healing, can quietly pull you away from the raw, unimpressive work that real change requires. None of this is an accusation, it's a redirection. The goal isn't to make you feel like you've been doing it wrong. It's to point toward what doing it right might actually look like. And it looks less like mastery and more like honesty. Less like having answers and more like being willing to stay with the questions slightly longer than feels comfortable. The work that actually changes you rarely looks impressive from the outside. It's quiet. It's private. It's the unglamorous practice of actually feeling the thing you've only been thinking about.
Viktor Frankl spent years in Nazi concentration camps. He lost his wife, his parents, his brother. Every external freedom a person can hold was stripped away from him, and in a place that had taken almost everything, he found something that couldn't be touched, what he called the last human freedom, the ability to choose his response to whatever happened to him, not control over the situation, not the absence of pain, just one thing,
a sliver of conscious choice inserted between the event and the reaction to it. That sliver, that gap between stimulus and response, is where everything that matters actually happens. It sounds almost too simple to be useful. In practice, it's one of the hardest things a person can build, because the entire function of a trigger is to collapse that gap. The stimulus lands, the response fires, and there's no space in between. Just one unbroken, lightning-fast chain that feels completely outside your control. That's not a malfunction. That's the system working exactly as designed. Speed over accuracy, every single time. So the goal here was never to eliminate triggers altogether. That's not freedom, that's numbness, and it comes at a real cost. The actual goal is to slowly, deliberately, widen that gap between what hits you and what you do next. Not eliminating the reaction, just making room for a choice to exist inside it. Here's what that looks like in practice, because it's less abstract than it sounds. It starts with noticing, not analyzing, not explaining it to yourself, just noticing. The tightness arriving in your chest before you said a word, heat rising in your face, a familiar thought pattern starting to spin up. These physical signals show up before the full reaction takes hold, if you're paying attention to your own body instead of only to what's happening outside it. Most people miss this window completely because nobody ever trained them to look inward in real time. So the first real practice, and it is a practice, something built slowly, not switched on overnight, is learning to notice your own internal state as it's happening. Not at midnight, replaying the argument in your head, in the actual moment, the breath before you speak, the second before you hit send. That noticing creates a micropause, and inside that micropause, you get to ask one question. Is this coming from who I am right now, or from something older? You don't need a perfect answer. You don't need to trace it back to its exact origin in real time. The asking itself is what interrupts the automatic chain. This is where the Stoics had something genuinely useful. Epictetus taught that people aren't disturbed by events themselves, but by the judgments they layer on top of those events. The event is neutral. What you decide it means, and what you do with that meaning, is where your actual agency lives. That's not a cold philosophy. It's an intensely practical one. It's saying, the world will keep doing what it does. People will say what they say. Things will happen you didn't choose. Your power was never in controlling that. It's in what happens inside the gap, between the event landing and you responding to it. And here's the part that starts to feel almost strange when it kicks in. The gap widens on its own over time. Not through brute willpower, but because as you actually do the deeper work on the original wound, its charge starts to drain. The thing that used to feel like a 5-alarm fire starts to feel like a familiar, manageable discomfort. Not pleasant necessarily, but no longer running the show. You stop reacting from the wound, and you start responding from the person you've been quietly, imperfectly building since the day you decided to actually look at yourself. That's not a small shift. That's the whole project. Understanding all of this is one thing. Living it is an entirely different skill. So let's get concrete about what this looks like day to day, not as some idealized version of you, but as an actual practice. The first shift is the most counterintuitive one. Stop trying to stop reacting. If your only goal in a triggering moment is to not react, you're fighting your own nervous system head on, and it will win almost every time because it's older, faster, and more powerful than willpower alone. The goal isn't suppression, it's redirection. You're not trying to block the internal response. You're learning to give it somewhere useful to go before it spills out in a way you'll regret later. This starts in the body before anything else. Before your mouth opens or your thumbs start typing, check in physically. Where do you feel it? Jaw, stomach, throat, shoulders. Sensation is data. It tells you how activated you actually are, which tells you how much space you need before engaging at all. A little tightness in the chest might mean you can still participate in the conversation with relative clarity. A full-body flood of adrenaline means anything you say right now is coming from somewhere reactive, not reflective, and it needs a beat to settle first. This is where the almost embarrassingly simple tools earn their place. They're not magic. They work because they intervene directly in your body's physiology. A slow exhale, longer than the inhale, switches on your parasympathetic nervous system and starts pulling your body out of threat mode. Splashing cold water on your face does something similar. Even just walking into another room can break the loop. None of these are dismissive little coping tricks. They're physiological interventions that buy you the conditions under which choice becomes possible again. Once you're even slightly more settled, not calm, just less flooded, the next move is curiosity instead of reaction. Ask yourself what story you're telling right now, not what objectively happened, but what you're making it mean. Because the trigger was never just the external event, it's the interpretation your system slapped on top of it instantly, faster than conscious thought. Someone went quiet, and your system said they're pulling away. Someone gave you feedback, and your system said, they think I'm not good enough. You can't catch that interpretation in the moment it forms, but you can catch it afterward and actually examine it. Is that story definitely true? Or is it just the most familiar one? The one your wound has been narrating for years? This isn't about dismissing your feelings. They're real, and they matter. But your feelings are responding to your interpretation of the event, not necessarily to the event itself. And interpretations can be revised once you're calm enough to actually look at them. The third piece is reflection after the fact, not in the heat of the moment. When you do react in a way you're not proud of, the instinct is usually one of two things: defend it, I was completely justified, or spiral into shame, I'm hopeless, I'll never change. Both miss the actual opportunity. What's useful instead is sitting with it afterward and asking what triggered you, what it reminded you of, what need got activated, and what you'd do differently with 5 more seconds of space. Done consistently, without self-judgment, that reflection is where the real rewiring happens. You're teaching yourself a new pattern, one your nervous system will gradually start to adopt, not because you forced it, but because you kept showing up curious instead of critical. This is slow. It will rarely feel impressive from the inside, but every time you catch yourself a moment sooner than last time, every time you choose to ask instead of react, you are genuinely rewiring something real. That's not a metaphor. That's neuroplasticity doing its quiet, unglamorous work. Let's come back to where we started. That moment someone said something, a look or a tone or a single word, and everything in you fired at once. That moment is real. It happened. And honestly, some version of it will probably happen again, because you're a person with a history, living among other people with histories of their own, and sometimes those histories collide in ways that strike something deep. That part doesn't fully go away, and pretending otherwise isn't the goal. What can change, and does change for people who actually do this work honestly, is what that moment means to you afterward, what you do with it, how long you stay trapped inside it, how much of yourself you lose before you find your way back out. There's a version of you, not flawless, not invulnerable, just more integrated, who meets a trigger and recognizes it, not in a detached, clinical, ah yes, I see what's happening way, but from somewhere genuinely settled inside. A version who can feel the activation rise and stay present with it long enough to ask, what is this actually about? What does this part of me need right now? And then, and this is the part that used to seem impossible, actually offer it that thing yourself, instead of demanding someone else supply it, instead of reacting in ways designed to extract it from the outside world. Turning toward the wound directly and giving it what it's been reaching for the whole time. Acknowledgement, presence, the simple message that you're not in danger anymore, that this moment is different, that you are different. This is what people mean when they talk about reparenting yourself. It's not a wellness buzzword. It's the actual practice of becoming the steady, responsive presence for your own younger, frightened parts that wasn't always available to them back then. None of this requires perfection. It doesn't require that you never get triggered again. It requires consistency, showing up for your own inner life with the same patience you'd offer someone you genuinely love. And here's the thing worth clearing up before we close. None of this is about becoming unbothered in the way that phrase usually gets used, some stoic mask, an unreadable face while a storm rages underneath. That's not peace, that's suppression wearing better posture. The real equanimity, the kind Frankl found in conditions almost nobody else has survived, the kind the Stoics kept circling back to, comes from doing the interior work thoroughly enough that the old wounds stop running the show. Not because they've been silenced, but because they've finally been heard. Because the need underneath each trigger has been met, or at least acknowledged enough times that it no longer has to scream for your attention. When that starts to happen, something quietly remarkable opens up. You can sit inside a difficult conversation without disappearing into it. You can hear criticism without either collapsing under it or fighting it off with everything you've got. You can be misunderstood without needing to correct it immediately. You can tolerate someone being upset with you, or wrong about you, or pulling away from you, and feel the discomfort of that fully, without it controlling what you do next. That's not coldness, that's not distance. It's actually the deepest form of presence there is, because you're fully there, feeling everything, and still choosing what to do with it. That's what the gap gives you. Not the absence of feeling, but the freedom to feel something without being ruled by it. So next time someone says something, a tone, a look, a word that lands wrong, and you feel that familiar tightening start to rise, just pause for one breath. Ask what the feeling is actually carrying. Listen to it the way you'd listen to someone you genuinely care about. You are not your reactions. You are the awareness sitting just behind them. And that awareness, patient, curious, in no hurry, is more than enough to build something real on.
Real growth rarely announces itself with fireworks. It shows up quietly, in the moment you catch yourself half a second before the old reaction takes over. If that's the work you're in right now, drop "I'm becoming" in the comments and mean it when you type it. Subscribe if this kind of thing speaks to you, turn on notifications, and stick around. What's coming next goes even further into this. You've already done the harder part just by staying until the end. Thank you for being here. Keep going.